Okay, so call to order the City of Wilsonville Budget Committee meeting January 26, 2021 at 6 o'clock on the nose. First thing is roll call.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Here.
Council President Akraval.
Here.
Councilor Lehan is excused. Councilor West.
Here.
Councilor Linville.
Here.
Chair Carr.
Here.
Member Bunn.
Here.
Member Lagarza.
Here.
Member O'Neill.
Here, excuse me.
Member Ham.
Here.
And I just want to take just a second to welcome the new members, Sean O'Neill and Katie Ham, and then welcome back Julie Fitzgerald, who is now to the committee, who's now our mayor. So thank you all for joining us. And I will turn it over to our city manager for Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Excellent, thank you. So moving along down the agenda, our next one is the introduction of the finances.
Well, thank you.
I'm not sure. Yes.
Just going to introduce ourselves. My name is Kathy Rodacher, and I am the City Finance Director. And tonight we also have Keith Katko, our Assistant Finance Director. And tonight we'll be talking about our year-end estimates and what we plan on seeing at the end of the year. When the importance of this is that it will be the beginning fund balance for the budget of next year. So that's what we'll be looking at. And moving to the next item, we will we have Rob Moody and his sidekick, Jordan Henderson from Marina and Company. And they are going to be presenting the new forecast model that they have, that their team has put together to help us determine when we need to do financing for our larger projects, and see if there are times when we could combine projects to be able to take a larger loan out but get better rates. One of the interesting things with Rob here on our screen is that you have 20 years worth of assistant finance directors from the city of Wilsonville. Rob was had the position, then I took over, and now Keith. So thought that was kind of funny how we all come back, right? So Rob and Jordan.
Great, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate you all and your time this evening. So we don't have a PowerPoint per se to show you tonight. What we do, or what we're going to do, and I apologize if this feels a little bit clunky in terms of the dog and pony show, if you will, but Jordan's going to share his screen and put the model up there for you to see, and I'm just going to talk through part of it. So what you're seeing on your screen here is an overall citywide infrastructure dashboard. There is a ton of information here that spans roads, water, wastewater, stormwater, etc. And the good news for all of you is you don't have to pay much attention to this level of detail. Staff is going to be able to use this model and this dashboarding to do a lot of what-if type of analysis. So let me just kind of provide some introductory remarks, and then we'll look at some specific pieces of the model. So we were engaged by the city, as Kathy mentioned, to forecast the long-term capital project expenditures for the city based on some information that's currently available and utilizing a number of different assumptions. So we projected replacement and major maintenance costs by infrastructure type, so roads, water, wastewater, and stormwater, through the year 2045. So we started with an inventory of the infrastructure from the city's engineering group and the GIS information, along with some detail around asset condition, installation dates, and some cost information where we had it. So we worked with staff on some assumptions around estimated useful lives for various types of infrastructure, water pipes versus sewer pipes, et cetera, and various conditions and life cycle measurements. So we projected all costs in 2021 dollars and then provided an assumption for inflation adjustments year over year using some historical information from the engineering news record, as well as kind of just what we think those costs might do off into the future. Then we overlaid that model with staff estimates of the 5-year CIP plans. Now, we did that simply to show you what some of the impacts are. The data that's in those amounts isn't accurate, okay? I mean, it's not final, it's not real, because the city's in the middle of doing its master planning. But we wanted to make sure that that piece of the modeling didn't get left off. Then we overlaid all of that cost information with forecasted resources based on current reserves in each of the funds, as well as expected rate revenues, expected SDC revenues, and the potential for debt financing where it'll be necessary to meet those cost requirements over time. So the model currently only incorporates the reimbursement portion of SDCs. Some of you may be familiar with the SDC structure, but there's typically two halves of an SDC. There's an improvement piece that is dedicated and restricted by statute for capacity improvements and growth. And then there's the reimbursement portion of SDCs, which can be used for maintenance and replacement. And so we built those dollars into this model because this model focuses on existing infrastructure and replacement and maintenance of that existing infrastructure. This model doesn't really take into consideration planned new projects or new construction of, for example, the expansion of the water treatment plant is not built into this model currently. For that reason, this is a single data point, if you will, amongst a lot of data points that the city will use for forecasting costs and doing financial planning. And I just want to reinforce that this isn't meant to be an overall kind of final answer on where costs will be and what the requirements to cover those costs are, but it's another tool in the city's bag, if you will. So kind of all of that in place, understand that some of these assumptions and some of these factors are likely to change over time, and so the model will kind of live and change with those changes. The projections offer some insights into the cost patterns for the city over the next 25 years. So these patterns are affected by environmental environmental factors, weather, traffic patterns, development within Wilsonville, as well as changes in assumptions over time, like I just mentioned, cost factors, revisions of useful lives, and condition indices. The model will need to be updated for CIP input once those master plans are completed. So now I want to touch on kind of what the model tells us in terms of each of kind of the major segments. Jordan, if you can blow up the model so we can see the charts there to the right, yeah, perfect.
So I have one quick question. How often would you expect these to be updated? Or
probably annually, as you gain additional insights through the budget primarily. So what you're seeing here is a couple of charts that show basically what's available for funding of these repair and replacement projects. So this top one is for roads, and you'll see initially there's some fund balance there, there's some reserves in place. It drops down, and then you'll see each of these step-ups are anticipated borrowings to help pay for costs over time. The next one down there is for water, and you'll see you start with a fairly strong and healthy balance, and you'll see as we get into talking about this that the anticipated or projected revenues over time are expected to cover those costs, cover the projected costs, and continue to build reserves. But again, this isn't the whole picture, right? I mean, some of those reserves that you have currently have been identified for that new expansion of the water treatment plant. So there'll need to be some adjustment here. So Jordan, if you could go over to the roads tab for me, please.
Do you want the raw data?
Yeah, please. Just initially, yeah. So I just wanted to show everybody here that this is just a ton of very detailed data that was loaded into the model and then is kind of aggregated and used to create that summary page that Jordan was showing you a moment ago. And then Jordan, if you can go to the resources tab, please. So this is the kind of the intermediate summary information, if you will, and I know it's really hard for y'all to see on your screens, but what we've done here is taken on the far kind of left top there, we took the reserves or the fund balance that currently is recorded, and then we take on a couple of lines down, we took the two primary resources to road maintenance and repair. One is the state gas tax, and the other is the road maintenance fee that's collected. And we have those for fiscal year 2021, and then we projected it out across the next 25 years based on an assumption of what, you know, those revenues may or may not do. The city staff has the ability to go to the assumptions page and change those assumptions based on what they know and see that ripple across the whole model. We just wanted to show you here kind of what this looks like without kind of overwhelming you with all of the details. Then below that, we have SDC revenues, again, projected out. You'll notice that we don't project them out very far. For purposes of just getting something in the model to look at, we actually projected that SDC revenues would decline over the next several years to zero at the time we put this together, I wasn't aware of the changes in the urban growth boundary that are being anticipated for the city of Wilsonville. And we just took a real, again, just for testing purposes and to make sure that the model worked, we just took a very conservative approach and said, well, Wilsonville is just about built out, so we won't see endless development. So we just allowed that to sort of dwindle. Now, clearly that's not an accurate picture, but staff can correct that as they work with the model. Then a few lines down below that, we took that total resource by year and we put in the projected costs that come out of those detail sheets. So we have projected, we called it the capital spend, that we project in each of the next 25 years based on how old the roads are, what kind of condition they're in, what the city's sort of policies are for addressing roads within certain age ranges. And this was all based on information that we gleaned from working with your city engineer and kind of what the approach is. So for example, if a road is between 5 and 10 years old and it reaches a certain condition index, they may just do crack sealing. Whereas if a road is 40 years old, they may choose to do an overlay, or they may choose to take it down to the bedrock and completely reconstruct it. All of those scenarios are put into this model with some logic arguments based on kind of if-then analyses. If the road fits into this bucket, this is what we expect them to do, and we've projected the costs associated with each of those actions. It's actually a pretty cool deal to mess around with and play around with. Then below that, we dropped in the 5-year CIP there that you may be able to see. I don't know if you can actually see it or not. But again, those were some estimates of the next 5 years. Understanding that a number of the costs included in that CIP may already be addressed in this projection model. We didn't have the detail of the specific projects that made up the CIP. Again, that's something that will need to be kind of worked out once that master planning is complete. And then you'll see there's a net at the very bottom for roads there, and that's the amount of dollars available for expenditure in future years. And you'll see it drops down. I think it's in year 2029 or 2028 there. We threw in an anticipated borrowing of $18 million because if we ignore the capital, the CIP stuff, that's about where we expect you'll need to issue some debt to address the rest of the projects that are scheduled out. And then there was another anticipated borrowing in like 2034, I think. On my phone here, I really can't see what that date is, but you get the gist of it, that you basically spend down your resources and then the city will need to anticipate a financing in order to get you back up to being able to fund those projected costs. So with respect to roads specifically, I just want to make a couple of comments and then we can take a look at the next one. Expenditures for road maintenance and replacement average approximately $1.2 million through 2027, which basically allows you to kind of pay as you go with the reserves and the rate revenues that you have coming in each year. The model indicates, again, some level of debt financing will be required for forecasted expenditures in the near future, right around that 2028. Actual needs and related costs will depend to a large extent on any preventive maintenance, the timing of CIP projects, and then other variables. So are there any questions kind of about how this works and what that looks like there for water? Let me pause for just a second.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I should raise my hand, sorry. No, I can wait.
Okay, I can't see it anyway.
I'm sorry, I'll wait till you do your presentation. Thank you, sorry.
No, you're okay. If you have a question.
No, I know, I jumped. That's okay, I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay. So, Jordan, can you just scroll down to the water section of this part? Great, thank you. Again, if we kind of ignore, and the format here is the same. So what I'm going to do is ignore that 5-year CIP information that's in there. And if we do that, because again, we believe there's probably some doubling up of the cost, the forecasted average capital expenditures for the water system outside of that CIP are just under $1 million per year over the next 25 years. So if we overlay that with current reserves, anticipated rate, and SDC revenues, the model shows sufficient resources to cover those costs annually without any need for supplemental debt financing. This is primarily due to significant reserves in both the water operating and water SDC funds and some assumed annual increases in user charges for water. So, again, if there's a large portion of that water kind of beginning fund balance that has been identified for expansion of the water treatment plant, we would want to parse that out of this model so that we really truly have apples to apples in terms of projected repair and replacement and monies available for that projected repair and replacement. So, Jordan, if you can scroll down to wastewater for me, please. Thank you. Similar to water, and again, ignoring CIP, the modeling forecasts average capital expenditures for the wastewater system well under what the projected resources are for the next 25 years. So projected capital costs approximate about $1 million per year. And so when we overlay that with the beginning balances and the rate revenues and the SDC revenues, it appears you should be able to cover all of those costs out into the future without having to borrow. And then the same is true for stormwater. Thanks, Jordan. Again, capital costs, actually, I'm going to back that up. In stormwater, we have a different situation where projected costs are about $2.8 million a year on average through 2045, whereas your net annual rate and SDC revenues for the same period average $2.6 million. So you've got a delta there that's going to have to be addressed initially by spending down beginning fund balance, and then eventually there'll be a need to supplement that with some borrowings likely in the 2027-2028 timeframe. So that kind of just talks you through the structure of the model as well as kind of some early conclusions about, and again, these conclusions that I just gave you are based on some assumptions that are going to need to be kind of reworked and revised for better information as it becomes available. So with that, Jordan, you can probably take the model down, and I would be happy to entertain questions. So, Member Bunn, I think you had questions.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'll wait. I'll wait. Thank you.
Anybody else? I don't have everyone on my screen, so.
Thank you. I thank you so much for this presentation and for walking us through and kind of giving us a peek at some of the underlying screens and calculations and how that is all derived. I understand you're saying, you know, the adjustments will need to be made and some things had to be plugged in to have calculations that function, because you can't have blanks and make a calculation function, right? But I wonder if for instance, when you were looking at the water and kind of walking us through that, is funds from the big pipe project, is that included?
No.
I don't want to get too granular because, like you said, you know, adjustments need to be made. But for the water one, did our funds that we'll be receiving in time from the big pipe project, did that flow into that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Brian's shaking his head no. Okay.
No.
No, that money's not restricted. It's essentially the same category as general fund money. So council can determine to use that in any way it wants to. It doesn't just have to use it for the water fund.
Okay, so it's not on any of the categories then for?
Not in the 5-year forecast,
Okay.
no.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Gerald.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the staff role in implementing this chart and what kind of time frame they need to start infilling the chart.
So I would anticipate that Keith would do all this work. No, you know, it's clearly, it's a finance tool, so it would be up to Kathy and Keith to either maintain the tool or to delegate that to someone within the department. But there's a heavy reliance on information from engineering. We had the opportunity to spend some time with the city engineer, and he was incredibly helpful in terms of getting us kind of base data and raw data that we needed to build the model. But as he becomes aware of, you know, significant changes in, I guess, direction of the city, or changes in council goals or priorities, or changes in the way the budget committee chooses to, I guess, prioritize resources, those things will drive adjustments to the model. In terms of timing, those master plans will be kind of critical in terms of updates to the model, because not only does the master plan process look at like new projects, but it also takes into consideration the kind of the status, if you will, of the water system. Now, luckily, Wilsonville isn't very old as Oregon cities go, so their infrastructure is in better shape than some. But there are areas, even when I was with the city of Wilsonville, there was, you know, concerns about certain areas of the infrastructure that were aging and needed to be kept up. So all of that will need to be factored in. I guess I don't look at it as every March, you know, we need to sit down and plug this thing and make it work and then see what it tells us. But at least once a year, there would be an opportunity for updates, potentially more often than that as information comes available.
Thank you. Mr. Bunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a question either for Finance Director Roddecker or City Manager Cosgrove. This presentation was very good, a lot of information. I'm impressed with the scale and complexity of it. Was this something that we one of the things I was scrolling through my emails, have we used this model in the past, and staff has used this and we've never shared it with the budget committee, or is this something new? I didn't see any emails about it, and so maybe it was. I'm always the last one to find out about things anyway, through my own fault. So I'm a little confused as to I'm not questioning the value of what this is. I'm a little confused as to why all of a sudden this has kind of been outsourced.
This was a project that was included in the finance budget last year, was to put together this financial forecast. After we had the water master plan that came up, I think it was with like $100 million worth of projects over the next 20 years. We knew that we were going into the same master plan for the wastewater treatment plant and assume that there will be, costs associated with that identified. We just felt it was time to have a type of tool like this to help us plan for those future fundings and borrowings. Yeah. We had planned on this last fiscal year, and so that's why we're bringing it to the budget committee this year.
I would characterize it as building a better mousetrap. We've always done 5-year forecasting. This is just a more sophisticated tool. It'll help us down the road be a little more specific and be able to adapt to master plans as they come online and make sure that we're keeping track of what we need to keep track of.
No, it's very good. It's just, so is this something that the budget committee can expect to see every year in March or January or whatever, just like, putting the model through its paces and saying, okay, this is what we're seeing right now at this point of the year. When you come back for your budget, the budget committee meetings in May, we'll have it, the model be cranked out, and this is what you'll see come when the budget is finalized, or finalized it is for enough for the budget committee review. Should we assume that going forward, this is going to be kind of a standard thing, either in the fall, late fall, or early winter, or late winter, and then kind of prepares for what we're going to see in May?
It's easy for me to commit to that since I'll be retiring here and in the summertime, but that is my vision. I would like to see that, this be used as a tool. We work very closely with engineering during the budget process anyway, and I think just taking it that one step further and helping to develop this as, using it as a long-range forecasting tool. That is my vision.
I would echo that and say it is our intention to make sure that the budget committee, as we have in the past, figuring out the timing of when the 5-year forecast is presented. Yes, it is our intent to share that information with the budget committee.
Right. Well, I don't have any. I don't, certainly. The only reason why I asked the question is because I've never questioned the the forecast and everything that I've ever gotten from staff. I've always been well pleased. I'm not alone in this. I mean, the praise for the work that the city staff does has been exemplary by everybody who takes time to really understand what they do. And so, but I was just wondering, well, maybe this is something they've done in the back, and maybe they're not that good. It's just because I'm just kidding. It's just it's been this model all along. So it's kind of like don't look behind the curtain type of thing. But so it's been very good, and I've always been very appreciative of the excellence of which the staff has fed information to the budget committee, make it easy for us to make our decisions. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councilor Linville, and you're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Rob. That was a lot of detail and a lot of very small numbers for us to see. But I can certainly see the advantage of having a tool like this to forecast. Sometimes the tools are one more bit of work to do, and I think probably as Kathy retires, it will probably be a couple of years of utilizing the model to get to the place where there's some confidence that in fact it actually can forecast accurately, or at least enough for budgeting purposes. So I have a couple of questions. One is, did you test this model based on previous year's data to see whether, in fact, it actually worked accurately. And is the primary purpose to validate or to forecast?
That's a great question, and let me address the first part first in terms of testing on prior year data. It's not that type of model in terms of we don't know the answer, and so we couldn't go back and plug in data and see if it gave us, like a true answer. Because it is more of a projection than a validation. So your two questions are linked, and appropriately so. Really, what it's meant to do is as I mentioned early on, take a bunch of raw data and pull it together and mold it into something that gives you some sense of what the future might hold in terms of costs, and then give you a sense of a comparison of available resources with those costs to show you the gaps. The piece that was missing previously in terms of city projections, the city's always done a really good job dating way back to when I was there. I can't take a lot of credit for it because Gary Wallace did all the work on it, but going back to the operational forecasts and those 5-year projections of like fund balance in the operating funds. What we didn't have at that point was something that said, we have a road, and that road is a mile long, and currently it has a condition rating of 78 out of 100. Given that, and what we expect are the estimated useful lives of roads, we expect that road to last 50 years. Currently, it's got an index of 78. So what we know is kind of then what we're going to have to do and when to bring that road back up to, a 95 or whatever the target is. And we can tell with some level of accuracy based on, what we plan to do and when. We know when we're going to do that, and we can then project based on what it would cost to do it today. We'll know, we can index those costs forward and know what it will cost to do it in 20 years, if that's the target. We never had that information kind of in one place to be able to plan, not just for roads, but the same people in Wilsonville that pay for the roads pay for the water and the sewer and the storm water. So it's nice to have something that pulls all of those projected costs together and shows you by year what the potential capital costs are for the city, so that you don't end up going, oh, God, we're 10 years down the road. All of a sudden now we got to go out and borrow money, because if we'd have known this, we could have maybe raised rates a little bit each year. I'm making it up now, but could have potentially planned for these anticipated costs and not have to just react. This sort of forward thinking, I don't see a lot at a lot of our other clients. The city of Wilsonville has always been sort of kind of focused on the future and using that to smooth the impacts of these costs. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I did.
Well, you did, because you helped me really understand a little bit more. And when I think it was Paul's question about will we see it every year, it may not have much meaning to us at this level, but more in terms of informing the budgeting process that the staff does and brings to the budget committee. So, good job. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor West.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Moody, I am really impressed by the presentation and impressed by the tool. I think, especially as we look going out of 2020 to 2021, we're always looking for innovative and adaptive leadership. And I think that this helps us do that potentially. And you touched on it a little bit in the statement that you just made, and it caught my ear, and I wanted to maybe see if you can expand on this a little bit further. Are there other municipalities that you know of that are, is this new and innovative? Is this like something that is a little bit avant-garde and cutting edge with being prepared and ready and forward thinking? Or are we seeing other cities that have had success with this type of tool and ability specifically that can be encouraging for us?
It's an excellent question. I've been involved with 2 other jurisdictions in terms of doing some form of this modeling. Clatsop County did something similar to this a few years ago, and I'm currently working with another jurisdiction to do not quite this detailed of a model, but something, just to give a real broad brush picture. I think it depends a lot on the level of sophistication of your staff and their ability to use a model like this and to obtain the information. For a lot of jurisdictions, just getting the base data to put something like this together is cost prohibitive, or it's just not, they don't have the resources to be able to pull it together. So you begin to try and do workarounds. Again, staff resources, I deal with a lot of small jurisdictions that, have 2 or 3 people for their entire finance crew, and they're trying to do accounts payable, payroll, and utility billing. They don't have the bandwidth to even begin to try and pull something like this together, let alone maintain it over time. So I think it's a function of the sophistication of the city of Wilsonville and your team. It shows some foresight and their willingness to put some resources into something like this that will help them plan and be better prepared. And again, I'm not sure I answered your question, but I don't see it widely done, but I think it's a function more of the size of the jurisdiction than it is anything else. I think everybody'd love to have this.
Well, I think, you answered my question, and I just think that innovation and adaptability is so vital right now, looking into the future. And I think it shows us being cutting edge and looking for every opportunity to be as fiscally as sound and responsible for future generations of Wilsonville. And that's us being just good stewards. And that's also a sign of really good leadership. So I'm encouraged by this, and the fact that it's just so new and interesting, and that that it hasn't necessarily been widely used yet, but it has so much promise, has me excited. So I really thank you for sharing this with us and helping us potentially incorporate this into our budgeting strategies.
Thank you. I'd be happy for any of you to refer us to anybody you'd like.
So I'm the software guy in the room, so I'm going to ask the question: how are you going to protect the integrity of a linked spreadsheet?
I'm going to trust Keith to not mess it up.
It's probably called redundancy, right, Keith? Are you getting excited about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to be a great tool to use.
Not even on. My mic was muted. Sorry. Yeah, I think this is going to be a really great tool, and I'm actually looking forward to getting into more of the details of it for the years to come. So.
But it looks like there's a lot of manual entry that then drives the graphs, and I'm just concerned that it's a spreadsheet. Do you have most of the sheets and cells protected and you're just minimizing the amount of data input fields?
That would be a next step. To be honest, we've not taken the steps to do the, put password protection on any of the sheets or on any of the data to protect those formulas. That's absolutely something that can be a next step, though. Thanks for raising the question.
Yeah, Member LaGarza.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was fantastic. I had a question about expandability. I don't know that we have other assets that we want to, kind of monitor or track to this level, but down the road, is it expandable or is it easily expandable, or is that something staff can do? How might that work?
Yeah, I believe it's expandable. For example, parks infrastructure would probably be kind of a next step on something like this. If the data, if the kind of the base data is available, there's nothing difficult about kind of replicating the logic within the model.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So one thing I would like to note is that a lot of the information that populated this spreadsheets came from our cartograph. This has been a program that Public Works has been diligently growing, where they GPS all of our different assets out in the field, and they're now, putting in data as far as what's been, when it was purchased, and if they, all this information really is being kept in that one particular program. So this is another side benefit of having that type of system here at the city.
Are you downloading out of that software and uploading into the spreadsheet? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And Jordan is a whiz. He was pretty amazing. It was interesting listening to him and Zach, our engineer, talk, because it was certainly not anything that would be said at a finance meeting. But after about an hour, I kind of started to figure out what they were saying, and went pretty well after that.
We have someone smarter than both Rob and I at the office who helped us with a lot of the formulas. So we have to give Courtney credit as well.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Takes a village.
I thought it was a very good presentation, and I like the forethought that's going into this, and I'm looking forward to seeing it once it's been revised for all the assumptions, maybe. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
I just wanted to add also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think that this also, as we get to using it, it gives us an opportunity to think about more and give us more information on, if you might want to call it, risks and opportunities that we can take in the future. So we're not just going from, week to week and month to month with our city. We can also think further ahead and do some pretty great things with some as good of information as we can get, because Keith is going to have it there all just exact. So we're just going to be so informed. But I think this is a great tool for long term as well.
I've always wanted to be just like Keith when I grow up, so.
Mr. Bunn.
Thank you, Chairman Carr. So I have to say, Chairman Carr's question kind of got me thinking. So this is all in Excel now, right?
Correct.
So do you have plans to port it into something else?
We don't. That's basically the scope of our engagement was to try and provide an Excel-based tool.
Oh, okay. I mean, Excel's fine for most things, but I would think and Chairman Carr would, we're both from the technology sector. Once you get 2 or 3 years of data in there, Excel starts getting kind of, I'm going to use a technical term, kind of loopy. So as important as this is, and again, what you've done is great, but as important as this is, this model, I would sleep better at night if eventually it was something other than, again, you're the guys, you're the geniuses, you put it together. But as a long-term, robust solution, I would feel better, or in my own limited understanding of it, how it works, I would just feel better if it was in something other than Excel. That's all.
If it was something like a SQL database, and then there was a business intelligence front end that published it, right?
Right, just, something that, anyway, just for what it's worth. Thank you.
No, fair enough. I always appreciate the input from the technology guys. Y'all are the ones that make us accountants look dumb, though.
Member O'Neill.
Sorry about that. Mr. Moody, I really appreciated the presentation as well. And I also like the comments of Member Bunn about staff and their efforts. I don't want to sound pessimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's an excellent idea. I tend to have seen this with the state of Oregon in other ways of how technology tools come into play, and how the role of data entry by staff has to come in. And I guess this looks great. I look forward to seeing the staff, understanding if the staff has the resources to put the data in and to work into a system of consistency and putting it in the long run so it's an actual effective tool. I've seen some great tools, but tools are worthless unless there is a consistency on the right data going in. And even though it's not meant to define a prediction of the future, I think all of us are kind of hoping there's some guide of what could happen later, even though it's just meant to be a tool. So I think it's awesome. I'm supportive of it, but I really would like to see how this is actually implemented and see how it fits into our processes. Thank you.
Hey, Andrew?
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Cosgrove.
Can I just point out that it's a new model, but I just want to be clear that we've been doing 5-year forecasting for a long time. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. So this is a little more robust model than we've used in the past, but it's still the same kind of system we've been using. And it really is just a planning tool. So if something gets off, I think that it wouldn't be the end of the world. We would probably figure it out pretty quickly. So I don't want anyone to feel too panicked about the fact that this is something that's a market departure from what we've done in the past, because it really is just a step up from what we've been doing. Not to say that Rob Moody and his team isn't outstanding at what they do, but we have been doing this for a long time.
Good. Member O'Neill.
And I wasn't suggesting that city staff is incapable of projecting a 5-year plan. I'm just saying that I have seen it in the past, no matter how good the staff is, if they don't have the support and resources to put the proper data entry, or there's a typo or misinformation, mistakes can be made. So I just think I'd like to see implementation of this moving forward and seeing how this tool actually works. But I totally agree. I'm not suggesting staff isn't qualified to do it. I just like to see how this tool works as we go ahead, and how hopefully, since our genius has been smart and is retiring to Bermuda apparently, that the resources that she leaves behind will be there to step in her shoes. And I really appreciate her service too. Thank you.
Yep. And I want you to know, Mr. O'Neill, I didn't take it that way. I just wanted to be clear, because there's been a few questions about the new model, that I just wanted to make it clear that we've been doing this for a long time. It's just a different model. But your point is well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council President Ackerval.
Thank you. We probably covered this enough, but I agree with many of the comments made, and there's some good suggestions and ideas tonight about ways to maybe automate this further going forward in the future, because sometimes automation can help eliminate some of those, like the data entry or the somebody mistakenly keying something in. And I wonder, and this could certainly already be a practice within the city, to do kind of archive snapshots when a model is being used, and then to file them so you have that archive snapshot. And if there is an issue that comes up, then it's sometimes a helpful tool in locating what happened and exactly when things went awry. Or, I'm sure that those sorts of practices are in place and could be done with an Excel version of a projection model as well, to do an archive snapshot and then just have those neatly filed and kept for, reflection later on too.
Okay, so that's enough of the discussion for this one. We'll let Rob and Jordan return to their normal TV shows for this particular time zone, and we'll see you later. Thanks a lot, Rob and Jordan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then on to the 2021 mid-year financial review. Take it away, Kathy.
So you're gonna how do I share it?
Thank you.
Go back to Zoom. Of course, they know I need it. So.
We already need IT support.
Click the PowerPoint right here.
That's the next level.
And share. Yeah. Now I can do spreadsheets, but this kind of stuff. Click the little. Whoops.
I should go into presentation.
Okay. So now we'll go on with our regularly scheduled program. The first thing that we have we got some important dates coming up here for the Budget Committee. On May 7th, you'll be receiving your proposed budget. This is per our financial management policies that are located in the back of the budget book. We are required to give each committee member 2 weekends to review the book prior to our first meeting. We will be sending out an email towards the end of April, and you'll have the option of either receiving it electronically on a thumb drive, or we can deliver you a hard copy of the book. So stay tuned for further information on that. And May 19th will be our first committee meeting. The time scheduled is 6 to 10. Kim, our fantastic clerk here, has set up all of the meetings with the same Zoom, so you won't have to look for different Zoom meetings every time. The next night, Thursday, May 20th, will be our second meeting. Typically in the past, we've been able to approve the budget in the 2 meetings, but if case we can't come to a resolution, we will come back on May 25th for the 3rd meeting. And the final process of the budget, it would be the adoption by City Council, and that will be held on June 7th. So one of the reasons that we moved this...
Councilor Linvall? You're muted.
Kathy, I just wanted to ask a quick question as kind of, moving through this for a full cycle. I know that during that very first budget committee meeting, there are presentations done by departments. And so my question really is about questions that we might have at the time And oftentimes, at least I found through the last process that many of my questions got answered during the presentations. But I wanted to ask you and Chairman Carr for just some directions about whether we submit questions ahead of time, if we have specific ones, or wait until after that first budget meeting.
No, send them in.
We prefer that you submit them in advance. You would send those directly to Keith and I. When we do answer the questions, we will send them out to the entire budget committee. So if other people are having those same questions, they would have the answer. But yes, send us an email with any questions that you have, and try to, especially the ones that require a little bit more research on our end other than trying to answer them on the fly during a presentation, is appreciated.
And make sure you reference page numbers when you ask questions, if that's relevant.
Okay, so typically we have this meeting in March. This year we moved it up to January because at the time we were doing the budget, we just didn't know what was going to be going on with the COVID-19 and what the impact was. I don't think any of us thought we would, this far into it, would still be meeting via Zoom. And we are seeing impacts. We'll go through them on more detail as we go through the operating funds, but gas tax and vehicle license fees and registration, those have been impacted. And up until about 6 weeks ago, we thought we were having a real major issue. However, once the tax receipts were received for November and December, it seemed like we're kind of getting back to where we thought we would be. Right now, we're projecting about $130,000 less than what we had anticipated. Up until then, it was quite a bit more than that. On the general fund, we have various fines and fees that we are that are not coming in. For example, library fees, park rental fees, instruction class fees, our municipal court fines, quite a few different areas here and there, and it all adds up. We have about a $500,000 shortfall in our projected revenues. And expenses, of course, we have additional expenses. We have budgeted $225,000 for our COVID response in the general fund, and they do plan on probably spending that throughout this fiscal year. But we have also seen reduction in certain expenses, postage, printing, office supplies, things that I don't normally would associate, but we do have smaller footprint. We have people working from home now, and apparently they aren't mailing anything or making copies of stuff. But we have moved, you kind of evolved to doing a more online presence, and we just don't use the printers as much as we used to. And of course, it's important to remember that we have received over $2.2 million in COVID relief. About $1.2 million of that was for the transit fund, and they are also expecting another $1.5 million over the next fiscal year and the year after that. And we have received about $1 million for the general fund, and we also reimbursed the urban renewal districts for, they were the ones who had funded our small business grant program, so we refunded that to them. So before we start the fund analysis, there is one thing I have to have one disclaimer. And since we moved this meeting up 2 months, we were not able to capture all of the year-end estimates associated with our capital projects. We got those late this afternoon, but it's so much information, we didn't have time to filter it through this presentation. So we are using estimates. We'll indicate when those estimates are. And what we will do is once we get this information all processed, we will send out a copy of the updated spreadsheets to each of you so you'll understand what exactly where we're at. And of course, the importance of this is that the ending fund balance for fiscal year 21 will be the beginning fund balance for fiscal year 22. So it's important that we have as accurate estimates as we can come up with. So now we'll go into each individual operating fund. We'll start out with transit. And of course, our transit guru is Mr. Keith Katko.
So yeah, just to echo what Kathy was saying, we're really trying to reconcile the past budget expectations with the current realities, and we're really trying to get at that estimated ending fund balance for each one of these funds, because that's where we're going to start that budget process with that beginning fund balance, which is the projected ending fund balance of this current year we're in. So first up is the transit fund, which accounts for a single program, and that is the Smart Transit program. And you know, going forward, other funds may contain multiple departments, like the general fund, of course, has many departments in it. Also, just to step back real quick to explain what you're looking at here, as the format is going to be replicated for each of the 9 operating funds we look at. So for both resources and requirements, and we'll have a slide for each fund, they are displayed in detail by category on the rows in reference to columns for their budget and their year-end estimate and balance remaining, or the differential. So is this the microphone I need to be working on? Okay, I'm sorry. And it's really the differential that we'll focus on with explanationary comments, but anything really is up for discussion or questions. Kind of just raise your hand as we go along, because this process is really insightful to really kind of understanding the revenue flows and the expenditure flows for the entire city and, you know, for each fund. The transit fund here we'll start looking at, and it has a beginning fund balance. You'll see at that bottom row in the year-end estimate of $6.6 million. That is a precise amount, and that's tied to our financial statements for the year ending June 30th, 20. They're still being technically audited. The audit is taking a little bit longer, mostly because we have received so much CARES federal funding that the audit requirements for that federal grant was late coming out from the federal government, so it delayed our whole audit. But you know, it's good news because we received all that federal money. But in general, those beginning fund balances are pretty set. They're not going to change. But the audit, the official audit, will be coming out later this month. So we're going to go from that transit beginning fund balance of $6.6 million. We'll look at all the resources and we'll look at the requirements, and we're going to end this fund with a $7.8 million fund balance. This fund is doing pretty well, which is, you know, exceptional. Over the years, this fund has always been on our watch list of worrisome funds, but they've rebounded significantly over the course of the past 2 years. So the first item we're going to look at is transit tax, and the transit tax is assessed at a 0.5% of an organization's payroll, which we are projected to be coming in right at budget and in line with the historical trending at 5 million. We basically bring in about 1.25 million a quarter. And what's driving this, really, even though the economy is very unstable or unsettled right now, is the largest local employers in the area, the Mentor, Fleer, the Rockwell, they are pretty much still holding strong in their local area payroll, resulting in really a stabilizing revenue source for this fund. So we're projecting that the revenue is really on track to come in as budget. So that's good news for the fund, of course. Two of the other really large revenue sources for this fund are federal grants and state grants. Federal grants traditionally have come in as capital related. However, with the CARES Funding Act that Kathy mentioned related to the pandemic, SMART was awarded $1.1 million in an operating grant in the prior year. And as she said, we are expected to receive another $1.1 million in the next month or two, as we have been notified. For both types of those federal grants, the funds are
only available in arrears, so that's only after the money has been expended. So for the variances you see in the federal government line item, that's particularly mostly caused by delayed capital purchases of the large buses. Traditionally, the buses have a long lead time from order to actual delivery, and then we don't expense it until we actually get delivered, and then we can draw down the funds thereafter. So the variances are mostly caused by that. That year-end estimate you see right there includes part of the CARES funding that spilled over from the prior year, and we're estimating we'll use about $700,000 of that new CARES money in the current year, and the rest of the CARES money will be pushed off into next year as well, but that's kind of what's going on in there. So you see that negative variance. Intergovernmental grants are kind of the same way. This, right, what intergovernmental state grants are is largely the state transportation infrastructure funds that this was created by the state back in 2017 and formed a state payroll tax that reallocated money back to transit agencies. So we receive about $400,000 a quarter. Unlike the federal grants, we get an allocation upfront quarterly, but to the extent we don't use it right away, the way we have reported that we are going to use it, it'll become part of the reserve fund balance until the time that we use it for the way that we have reported we're going to use it. That's a little complicated, but basically the STIF funding has a lot of strict rules and regulations and reporting requirements for its use, and we need to use it the way we have said in advance we're going to use it. Until that time, it'll sit in our reserve fund balance, basically. Intergovernmental grants, we receive money from the county, and that's basically for the dial-a-ride part of it. You'll see charges for services. We aren't collecting fares since the COVID outbreak. Basically, that's a decline of $170,000, but on the flip side, we're using the CARES money to cover those fares. Collecting fares is, good and bad. I guess the bad part about it is we got to count when we do collect all that. That's a lot of dirty money, dirty cash. It's dirty dollar bills and coins that we have to collect. So to the extent we're not collecting it, it really helps the finance department. And so that kind of sums up the transit resources. We're estimating on top of the beginning fund balance, we'll have $14.7 million of revenue in this fund. And then Kathy will look at the requirements on the next slide. The requirements from slide to slide will be broken out by the major cost categories here at the city. That's the personal services, that's the labor expense, materials and services, capital outlay. And that forms what we call the operating expense of the department. So we'll total that. Below that, you're going to see the transfers out. And that really is the fund transfers out money to the general fund to support the accounting function, the HR function, the legal, administration type funds, as well as the fund uses sometimes transit tax or even intergovernmental grant revenue to pay for CIPs. Transit CIPs can be bus shelters. In the past year, they had the parking lot improvements of the smart facility. They are building a CNG refueling station, as many of our buses are on CNG fuel. One of the other things that they're not doing that creates that variance this year, they had anticipated doing an architectural study, if you will, of an expansion of the smart facility, but that architectural rendering has been delayed until the next fiscal year, and that is also subject to be covered by a federal grant. So it's not happening this year, it'll happen next year. And to the extent you see that large variance up at capital outlay of 1.7 million, that kind of is the echo of that is the federal grant money that we're not recognizing. It's just going to be pushed off until the next fiscal year when those buses can be delivered, and then we will offset with a drawdown from the federal government for the revenue of that. Bottom line, at the bottom there, you'll see that's where we are projected with all those estimates and variances. We're going to end the year, we're projecting in June 30th, 2021 at $7.8 million. Part of that $7 million, though, is $2 million in STIF funding that we've received. We received that money up front. We will need to spend it in a manner that we have reported to the state that we will spend it, but so unreserved portion of that $7 million is about $5.7 million. That's a lot of information packed into that one little fund, but okay.
So would it make sense?
Councilor Linville.
Yeah, I was going to say, we just pause after every fund and then allow Chair Carr to ask questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so Councilor Linville.
Thank you, Chairman Carr. So I am looking at this estimated ending fund balance. I understand the $2 million in STIF that'll be in reserve, but will you not also have the 1.8 in the capital outlay money that it would be encumbered for the next fiscal year? So you really it'll show as a regular higher balance, but it really will not be, it'll not be money that is available. It'll have to show in that budget. Well, am I seeing that correctly?
Well, to the extent you're right, we will have 1.8 encumbered, but we don't really reflect the federal government money that we'll be able to draw down. So that really kind of nets to close to not completely zero, because of that 1.8 million that you see there, the federal government typically will cover 80% of in a federal grant. So we will be responsible for 20% of that capital outlay expenditure. But those are kind of encumbered, but we do have federal grant money available to cover at least 80% of that.
Councilor West.
Thank you. Quick question. On that first page you showed us for the transit fund, is the $900,000, almost $1 million right there, is that a loss this year because of changes with, are we in the red a little bit with transit there? I know generally I've seen transit in the black.
Right. No, not at all. All that is
things that have happened and.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not a loss at all. That's just a variance of the budget that we thought we were going to have in total resources. We thought we were going to have 15.6. We ended up with a year-end estimate of 14.7 revenue that we anticipated coming in. So it's a little less than that, but it's only because we're holding on to that federal grant money. We're not drawing it down yet because we haven't incurred the expense.
Okay, I'm tracking. Thank you.
Yeah. The fund is in very good shape. If you flip to the next slide, Kathy, too. So you have that $7.7 million ending fund balance. When you break that down, we have $2 million that's reserved for the STIF funding. And then the council adopted financial policy is to maintain at least 20% of operating expenses within the fund. So that's another $1.2 million. And the way transit operates is the transit payroll tax, of course, is collected in arrears from the local area businesses. So, for the quarter ending September 30th, we don't get that money until October 31st. So it's important we do have a certain amount of, at least probably $1 million or $1.5 million on hand to pay for ongoing expenses until we get that money in arrears for the quarterly payroll tax. So that's kind of that explanation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for our business community too. Thank you very much.
Well, I remember the day when Dwight realized that he was no longer on the watch list. He was, that was a really good day for him. There were many times when we were holding our breath when we would run the numbers for the transit fund. For the next one is our building fund. This is one of the funds that we still have on our watch list, although we're having some good news with the end of the fiscal year estimates that they have provided. They're actually anticipating receiving more license and permit fees than that they had budgeted. It's just $54,000, but you know, we take all donations. Their investment revenue is a little bit higher. They got in on some of those investments that had really nice returns, not like the ones that we have opportunities for today. And in the end, we're anticipating almost $156,000 more in revenue than what we had a budget for last year. Looking at their requirements, they're on track with their personal services, but you'll see that it's $97,000 savings that they're expecting to spend less than what they had planned. And this can be a variety of, they're doing a lot of different work schedules. It can be, we had our PERS where we got our reduction in PERS after we had set all of the different personal service costs. So there's a couple different things. You'll see this is pretty consistent through all of the operating funds. We anticipate ending a fund balance of $1.9 million, which is about $2.6 million higher than what we had anticipated. So that's a good news. I mean, they still have work to do and have to be very diligent with their expenses, but this is turning out to be a much better year than we had anticipated. The next fund that we'll look at is our Community Development Fund. This one has a little different story. The licenses and permits for the community development are really driven through based on the number of homes that we anticipate each year. It was down a little bit than we had hoped for. We're seeing about $100,000 less. As those are just coming in later, they will be, you know, we know they will be built. It's just a guess of as it will be this year or next year. Our charges for services, that's related to our CIPs. Once again, this is our finance estimates, and we'll fine tune that number up a little bit for you when we get that information in. We are anticipating an increase in other revenues. We are receiving a funding for the HB 2001 housing initiative. And as you'll see on the next page, they plan on spending that money as well. Here's where we did our estimates. They receive a cost per hour that they spend on each capital project, and it never really ties to anything. We do our best to come up with a best estimate, and we are always a little bit off. And once again, we'll fine tune that when we come in and when we send those back out. Overall, we're seeing about a $30,000 difference than what we had anticipated. Looking at their individual, they have 3 different departments. We have the CD admin. They have a little bit higher variance in their personnel costs, as we had a full-time position reduced to part-time for the rest of the fiscal year. So we're seeing some savings for that. And we're also seeing savings in our postage and printer and professional services that I had talked about earlier. In total, we're expecting about $177,000 less in expenses than what we had planned for. On engineering, they are on track, mainly because there is a vacancy still in this particular program. And we're also are seeing reductions, again, in professional fees and travel. And we're seeing a $287,000 reduction in the budget that they had requested. The story's a little bit different when we look at planning. We talked about them receiving money for this housing project up front, but a lot of the grant money that we have received will only be received after the work will be completed. So we will planning on doing the work this year, but we won't receive the funds most likely until next fiscal year. So with that, if they were to do everything they anticipate, they would actually end up the fiscal year with a negative balance. And this is not acceptable. When this happens, it's reported on our annual financial report. The report goes to the Secretary of State. The Secretary will reach out to our mayor and say, hey, what are you guys doing over there? So this is something that we will keep close eye on, and at the end of the fiscal year, if they have indeed spent all of this money, then we will go back to City Council and ask for a supplemental budget adjustment. Have any questions on the Community Development Fund? Yes, Mr. Bunn?
Oh, Bunn.
Yeah, so they're going to call you about a $16,000 being out of balance by $16,000?
Yeah.
Yep, I think we had it on $719 one year.
Yeah, we don't want any management notes in our audit.
They're quite sticklers with that, but it's the ORS, it's the budget, local budget law. So we're well aware of it. I think we got caught once, so.
Okay, thank you.
Going on with transfers out, that's once again is for all the general fund support, and they're anticipating ending up with a nearly $1.7 million, which is about a $400,000 increase over what they had anticipated in the budget last year. So now we go with the general fund. One of the things that a lot of finance managers were concerned about when, COVID first hit was what impact was it going to have on our property taxes. And we're really happy to say that we are not seeing any impact this year. A lot of mortgages have the property taxes already in the payment, and the mortgage companies are making it. Whether that was what the reason was, or everybody just decided to pay them to get that discount up front, but we are on track for our $8 million in property taxes. We are seeing about a $50,000 reduction in our transient lodging tax. It's just coming in lower, and we can pretty much contribute that to COVID, but we are still receiving some funds in. Our franchise fees, this is something that we receive in the third quarter, so we really haven't received anything, but we typically over budget, so we went ahead and estimated that there'd be about a $65,000 money less than what we had budgeted. Here you can see a big one, yes, Member Ham?
Sorry for my ignorance on this. What are franchise fees?
Franchise fees are the fees that we charge for the use of our underground utilities in our right-of-way, the public right-of-way. So PG&E, Northwest Gas.
Garbage. Republic Services pays a franchise fee, yeah.
Does that help you? One of the big reductions you see here is in our charges for services, and as we talked about earlier, this is our library fees, our park fees, our room rental fees, facilities fees, all these things that we typically collect, but due to the closures, we're just not able to this year. Our municipal court fines are down. We have a reduction in overall tickets, but we're also seeing that people don't feel comfortable coming to court, even though we feel that we have put a lot of really good safety measures. They're just still not wanting to come out. What we have started about 6 weeks ago is doing it over the phone. And it seems to be working well. We're hoping that this will get more people, ready to take care of their different tickets. Another area that we're seeing a decrease in is our miscellaneous revenues. These come in the forms of donations. the money that we collect at the community center for senior meals and things of that sort. Through it all, we are actually expecting to have more money than what we had anticipated. And a lot of that has to do with the COVID funds that we received at the end of last fiscal year, so that we had ended with a higher ending balance than we had anticipated. So have any questions on the general fund resources? Okay, we'll go on to the requirements. As you will see, program after program, we are really tightening our expenditures. We're all staying on track with our personnel costs, and we have various savings in admin. Metro grant expenses are being rolled over to next fiscal year, so we won't be seeing those this year. They are expecting a $225,000 savings from what was budgeted. Finance, like I talked about, postage, office supplies, things of that sort. We're anticipating about $113,000 in savings. And IS and GIS, they're on track for about $108,000 in savings. One of the things that they are also responsible for are our PEG fees. These are fees that we collect from cable companies to provide the services of putting our things out on the public TV. Legal, we had they had the assistant attorney left and a little bit of a delay before the new one was hired, so to have some savings there. HR are pretty much on track with what they had anticipated. Law enforcement is a big number in savings, but it overall is only a 4% savings as they have a large budget to begin with, but we expect about a $200,000 savings from what they had anticipated. A little over $23,000 for court, $32,000 for public works admin. This is where we've been tracking the COVID expenses. This was had the $225,000 supplemental budget adjustment approved by council. Facilities are, you can go line after line and you can see that everybody will be contributing, not spending what they had originally intended. In the park maintenance, they just this week found out that they were responsible for paying for the safety railings out at a park in Villebois, but with the savings, we will not have to ask for a supplemental budget adjustment. According to this information, they should be able to absorb it with the available funds that they had available. Parks and Rec, where we saw, the great decreases in fees and on all the different revenues not being collected, you're seeing that the other side of it here. They're anticipating having almost half of their budget savings in materials and services, as they're not paying out the tourism development and special event expenses, instructors, and all of the things related to the different programs that they have. Library, same as with the Parks and Rec, they expect about $163,000 in savings. Here again, we have our finance estimates. There are several projects that are funded through general fund monies, and we'll tighten up those numbers for you next week. As it stands right now, we anticipate a $14.3 million estimated ending fund balance, which is about $2.7 million greater than what we had anticipated. So the general fund, even though it has its bumps, it also has, some good things going on as well. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Katko for our public works.
Okay, these should go pretty quick too, so I won't belabor too many of the details, but there's some interesting items that get kind of fleshed out here. The first one we're going to look at is our road operating fund, and this fund is dedicated to the signal lights, the striping, the curbs, the gutters, the potholes, and all the minor repairs of the roads throughout the city. Now, it's funded through a state gasoline tax, which is 36 cents a gallon, and the state allocates that back to the cities based on our population. So this is one of those state shared revenues, and the city kind of benefits to the extent that we have the prison as well, because they are counted in the city population but aren't necessarily using the resources. So by virtue of our population, which I think we're at 25,000 roughly, our population figure, so that gas tax anyway gets allocated back in that fashion. And this is one of those ones where intuitively you see less people driving, so we are anticipating lower gas tax revenue, but not significantly less. 100,000 certainly is a significant amount of money, but we have seen it ramping up in these last few months, and we get it every month. So to the extent, as the COVID situation potentially improves, we'll get more people on the road, and the gas tax funding should increase. The other aspect of funding for this fund is the vehicle license fee from both Washington County and Clackamas County, which is $30. And basically 40% of that money from the county collected gets distributed back to the cities of the county. It's a relatively new fee, so I think established, I believe, in 2019. So we don't have a long trend analysis to see how much, the budget. So that's why we see the variance there until we get a more, trending revenue line. We'll be budgeting that more closely, I think. So this fund in general, the road fund starts at that 2.4 beginning fund balance, and as you'll see on the next slide, it really ends in the almost same position. Operationally, there's nothing really. There's no real variances other than some small things. The transfers out to the overhead, that's going to be spot on because it's an allocation. But the transfers out for road projects, as Kathy mentioned, we're estimating right now because we didn't have the official numbers, and that is really a conservative estimate. I mean, we're estimating that 85% of the roads projects will that use road operating funds will get completed. It'll probably be less. So to the extent that it's less, that money will flush back through and will remain in the fund balance. So in any case, the fund is pretty much ending where it began. I don't know if there's any questions on the road operating. We'll go to water operating. Water operating, we do, our year-end estimate is $8.8 million in water sales. And of course, we sell about $1.2 million to Sherwood, who use some of our water. And other than that, the total budget to year-end estimate's pretty spot on. Kathy, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the water operating fund started with a beginning fund balance of 17.8, and it's going to end with an $18.4 million fund balance. Part of that is, go back to the previous slide too. I think there's basically what's happening in the water operating fund. There's two departments. There is what we call the water distribution department, and that is the department that's really in charge of the system of the pipes and the delivery of the water. And then there's the water treatment plant, which is contracted out to Veolia Water. So that's an outsourced expense. And the year over year, we pretty much get that contracts pretty close to being spot on. So there's never really shouldn't be too much of a variance. We know going forward every year what the cost is generally. But anyway, so the next slide shows the ending fund balance of that 18.4 for the ending fund balance. If we go to the sewer operating fund, from the water to the sewer, same type of thing. Our revenues, our resources are pretty close to being as, we anticipated. $8.2 million charges for services. That'll give us a total resources available of $27 million. And it's going to go from a beginning fund balance of 17.9 to a projected ending fund balance of 16.4. Part of that is expected, we had expected anticipated CIPs that we were paying for, and that is part of the reason why we have that fund balance, is to pay for those projects. So if you go to the next slide, Kathy, operationally, pretty much on track. There's some savings in supplies and other tech contracted services. This fund actually has 3 departments. It has what the department we call wastewater collection. Again, that's the department that is responsible for not the service delivery, I guess the reverse service delivery. They're in charge of all the pipes throughout the city and maintaining them. We have an industrial pretreatment department that is responsible really for looking after those big manufacturing kind of companies which may need extra treatment for their discharge. And then we have the actual wastewater treatment plant, which is run by a third party as well, outsourced. It used to be CH2M Hill. It's now called Jacobs Engineering, who contracts provides service to run the wastewater treatment plant. So if you slide to the next slide, Kathy, transfers out. We have that. We also have in this fund we have currently $24 million in outstanding debt. So we do have the year-end estimates of 2.9 debt service on this fund, and we are anticipating refinancing this debt before the year end, just because rates have dropped so significantly over the past year, really. So this is something we will coming back to council with to refinance this debt pretty soon here. But we're sitting outstanding about $24 million outstanding debt on here. Our transfers out, again, related to sewer projects and facilities projects, we are estimating high that these will happen, and we'll get the firmed up numbers pretty quick here. So those numbers, the transfers out for the sewer projects and the transfers out facilities projects, the year-end estimate will change. Most likely will go down, and that, of course, results in a greater positive variance, and then it just, ends up in the ending fund projected balance, which we are currently projecting at $16.4 million. Here we go with stormwater. And the stormwater fund starts out with a beginning fund balance of $2.7 million, and that's going to end with an ending fund balance of $3.7 million. One of the largest reasons is that interfund loan down there on line 4, or line 3, that is an interfund loan from the general fund to the stormwater fund. It's a 5-year payback. Infusion of cash into the stormwater fund to pay for stormwater related CIPs, as we'll see on the next slide. Operationally, we'll have very little budget variances, and we have that debt service on that 4th line, which is debt service back to the general fund. So we get the money and we pay some of it back over the next 5 years. In the meantime, the proceeds of that are going to be used for stormwater projects, which are the last 2 bottom line numbers you see there that we're currently estimating. And then I think if you go one more slide, it really, it ends with the ending fund balance of that $3.7 million. A lot of that is just that cash infusion from the general fund until we spend that down on the stormwater CIP projects, which will happen, if not this year, next year for sure. Street lighting fund, the big story here is the LED, the conversion of the LED street lights. Charges for services are pretty much spot on. Looking at the average residential monthly charge is just under $5. It kind of depends on the street light that's in your neighborhood. Commercial rates are based on the number of employees in a company, or the multifamily charges are based on the number of units. But in any case, the revenue is coming in pretty much as expected. And then Kathy, if you go to the next slide, streetlight materials and services, that's primarily the PGE bill for the electricity, $350,000. Pretty much as we expected to keep the lights on in the city. And then the bulk of that is the transfer out to what we call streetscape projects, and that is the LED conversion project that is going on. Anticipating about $600,000 for this current year for phase 1 of the LED streetlight conversion, and then phase 2 will be in the next year as we accumulate additional usage fees to build up the fund balance again to pay for that ongoing LED conversion projects. That's the street lights. And that, I believe, are the 9 operating funds that we're going to talk about tonight.
Phew, a lot of numbers. So just to kind of end up things, I thought I would give you an update on our Munis implementation.
Kathy, I think you did have one question.
Should we pause and just see if there's any questions? Because
actually, it looks like
that was breathtakingly fast on some very complex operating funds. So we'll pause, share a car, and see if there's any questions from budget committee members, and then we can get into Kathy's highlight on units.
Perfect. Questions? Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. And that was a wonderful presentation, Chair Carr and staff. I just want to ask another question about the Community Development Fund, since I might be getting that phone call. Can you talk a little bit more about how that can be rectified? That particular fund, I know with local budget law, needs to end with a balance, needs to end in balance. So what are some perhaps remedies during the remainder of this fiscal year that might be in play?
Well, it will all depend on them actually getting the amount of work that they are proposing to get done. If they do indeed get it done, we will use existing fund balance to cover that difference. And then, of course, we would receive the money next year, because once the work is done, then we can, get our grant refund. So it's just, we're really trying to bridge the gap between one fiscal year and another.
So some of it is out of our control, it sounds like.
Yes.
We also are having conversations with the community development director about certain positions that are currently vacant, and maybe delaying those to make sure that we are not in a situation where we have to make any drastic reductions of that nature. It's easier to not fill a position because we do put a lot of resources into hiring and retaining qualified staff, so we don't want to get to that point. We also made several reductions in training and travel for obvious reasons. So there's ways that we can control expenditures if we feel like it's going to be an issue as we move along.
Thank you.
Other questions? I don't see others, so.
Goodness.
Kathy, go ahead.
Okay. So it looks like my last slide didn't get updated, so I'll just have to give you a verbal explanation of what's going on with Munis. We actually went live with our financials in October. So we are doing our accounts payable, we are doing our general ledger, and a lot of the little various accounting function related, project accounting, things of that sort. It has been quite challenging. We are finding that we were very, very spoiled with the custom reporting that we had that actually Keith had created. We were very used to just being able to pull up a very simple report that would give you that one number that you need. We're now having to do these canned reports that will give you a 200-page report that you have to work your way through till you can finally find that one number that you're needing. So we are really looking forward to that slowdown period that we've been waiting for about 2 years or so. And so that we can have Keith and Dylan, our senior accountant, work on creating these, more succinct and custom reports just for us. HR and payroll are moving right along. They are scheduled to go live in April, which of course is just right around the corner. Big change for the city will be electronic timesheets. So we'll begin training all of our employees here in the next month or two. And we're actually starting to schedule the dates now for the utility billing kickoff. So that will be another major undertaking. Obviously, utility billing affects every person here in the city of Wilsonville just about. So the amount of quality control on that one will be pretty intense. I remember when we were doing the Eden, every day the city manager would come by and say, we don't want to be Portland. We don't want to be Portland. Because of course at that time, Portland hadn't billed for like 2 years because they couldn't get their system to work. So I always think of that when I think about these implementations. But we are hoping to go live the first quarter of 2022. So things are moving along. I know that the downstairs community development, they are moving along as well with their Intergov implementation. We'll be involved in that somewhat as our transit tax and business licenses programs will be transferred over to their system. But other than that, we're surviving and trying to figure out how we're going to get this budget all together. Once we figure out how we can get it into Munis, we'll be raring to go. So anyway, that is our presentation for this evening. We will be back in May. Like I said, we will deliver your documents on May 7th. And we'll send out an email at the end of April to figure out how you would like that delivered. Okay, any other questions?
Any other questions? Yep.
Okay, well, good night. Appreciate your time and all the great questions.
Good job.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That sounds like the Waltons.
Good night. Good night, John Boy.
Good night.
Good night, Mary Ann.